So when we talk about argument structure, you usually see Toulmin come up. Toulmin is the guy that created some terms for particular parts of an argument. Claim, qualifiers, reasons and evidence, warrants, and backing. Some of these are familiar to you. Now, why do we have to give things special names? The purpose is that by naming some of these aspects of an argument, we can understand them better and identify them. We make them into something that we can consider and talk about by giving them that title. So what do we mean? The claim is just the argument that you're making, what the writer needs to prove. You should get a pet rabbit. This is what the author is arguing in this case. Now, you might have qualifiers, which are some kind of limitation you put on your claim. Maybe the group of people that should do it, or maybe the situation in which it should be done. So people who are thinking of getting a pet should get the pet rabbit, or if you could afford it, you should get a pet rabbit. Now, of course, you also have to support your argument. You need reasoning. You're not going to fall for any argument where someone just tells you do this. They need to give you a reason to convince you. So you will need to have the reasons and then evidence to support those reasons. So your reason for getting a rabbit as a pet might be because rabbits are gentle animals. And then in that case, you would need to support your claim, support your reason, by giving us some evidence for that. So maybe you can find statistics over how many people are treated for rabbit-related injuries versus injuries that they receive from other kinds of pets. And that could help you show that rabbits are more gentle than other options. Now, warrants is where it gets confusing. So we're going to spend a little bit more time on this. The warrant is the assumption that connects your reason to the claim. Audiences have to agree with your assumption or they will not be convinced by your reason. Sometimes you have to justify this. Sometimes audiences won't agree with them, in which case you will have to explain to them why they should agree. And sometimes you may need to select a reason that will have a warrant that lines up with your audience instead of one that might not line up with your audience. On the other hand, there are frequently warrants that are universal enough that you do not need to support them. Okay, so what do we mean by warrants? We talk about audience assumptions. If you are saying that your reason to get a rabbit is that rabbits are gentle animals, your assumption is that your audience will agree that a gentle animal would make a good pet. If your audience is a family with young children, will they think that a gentle animal would make a good pet? Probably. They probably want a gentle animal as their pet. They probably don't want some kind of vicious beast that's going to attack their children. Now, or even just a nice, friendly big dog who might knock their children down. Now, if your audience is an outdoorsy college student who wants a pet that they can be active with, take on hikes, will they agree that a gentle animal will be the best pet? Probably not. They'll probably say an active animal will make the best pet. They won't want a rabbit. And so telling them they should get a rabbit because rabbits are gentle won't convince them at all. So you always want to make sure that your assumption lines up with your audience. If you say we should do something to stop terrorism, you're assuming your audience wants to stop terrorism. And you probably don't need to support that at all because who doesn't want to stop terrorism? But you may need to support it. Perhaps you are saying that we need to do something so that we need to take an action in order for children to play more sports. You would have to perhaps support that assumption that we want children to play more sports. Now, how do you support an assumption? Your support for the assumption, or the warrant, is called backing. So if your assumption is that gentle animals make good pets, and you were going to support that, you could support that by convincing them, well, rough animals could injure family members or damage some property. If the animal is gentle, humans can interact with them peacefully, and they'll have to have fewer precautions when they're actually handling the animal. Okay. So here we're going back to that assumption that people agree with. If you agree with an assumption, it's sometimes harder to find that assumption. So if your claim is that airports should use racial profiling in order to catch terrorists, your reason is to catch terrorists. Your qualifier might be that international airport specifically or particularly busy airports. Now, to prove this argument, you will need to show that racial profiling does in fact result in catching terrorists. So that's part of your actual claim that does require evidence. But your warrant, your assumption there, is that your audience wants the result of catching terrorists. Now, who agrees with that? Everyone. Everyone, except terrorists, agrees that we should catch more terrorists. So you don't have to support that. If you wanted to support that, you could talk about the cost of terrorism, why it's so important to catch terrorists, but you probably don't need to do that because we're pretty convinced. Now, sometimes your warrants do need support. Sometimes your audience does not agree with your assumption. If your argument is that the Endangered Species Act should be expanded in order to preserve genetic diversity, then your claim is that the Endangered Species Act should be expanded. Your reason is to preserve genetic diversity, and your assumption is that your audience wants to preserve genetic diversity. Now, most people aren't opposed to genetic diversity, but they might not understand why that's actually an important goal. So, you might need to provide some backing supporting that assumption. Why is genetic diversity necessary? What are its benefits? What are the problems if it's not supported? You also want to be aware of your warrant. So part of the reason you want to be aware of your warrant or your assumption there is so that you know if you need to provide more support. But another reason is so that you can make sure that your argument is aimed at the audience you want it to be aimed at. So if you look at these 4 reasons, we have 4 possible reasons we could give for our city to rezone neighborhoods to allow more college student housing. And if you like, you can pause right now and see if you can match those up yourself. You probably can. So looking at these reasoning, we should rezone neighborhoods for more college student housing in order to give students more opportunities for convenient and affordable housing. Well, who cares the most if students get convenient and affordable housing? Why, students do. They want their housing to be convenient and affordable. So probably reason 1 would resonate best with students. Local families might not care that much for students to have convenient and affordable housing. Or business owners, for example. All right, what about if our reason is that the resulting increase in taxes will allow for the improvement of the local public school system? Who cares if the local public school system is improved? Probably families. Maybe we want to appeal to business owners. What would business owners care about? Why, their own profits. So if we say we should increase this zone, we should rezone these neighborhoods to increase patronage of local businesses, that's going to be tailored toward those business owners. And of course, if we want to appeal to college administrators, then we want to focus on the benefit to their institutions. So we would say because it will allow local institutions to expand their programs. Now, of course, you might be arguing to multiple audiences and you might want to provide several reasons that are going to be tailored to various audiences. But you do need to consider what's going to benefit that audience the most. So, if you were filing an appeal to the insurance that they should cover a procedure, you don't want to spend your whole letter talking about how sad you are without getting it and how your family is suffering for it. Because your insurance company probably doesn't care only about that, or even a little about that, if we're going to be honest. So maybe instead of making an emotional appeal based on how it will benefit you so much, you'd probably want to instead make an appeal of how it's ultimately going to save them money in the long run to cover this procedure instead of continuing the various treatments that they did cover. So you want to consider your audience, and finding that assumption right there, that's one way to help tailor your argument to the audience. And that's why we use Toulmin, so that we can use those terms to help us understand the pieces of the argument and how they fit together.